Welcome to Skill-Based Art, a learning resource for art students and artist teachers. My name's Warren Crossett, and I'm going to be demonstrating a quick underpainting sketch of a still life that you see behind here. I'm going to work on top of a panel that was primed with acrylic sort of coloured ground, and I'm going to work on the top with just dilute oil paint using just a basic medium underneath to sort of keep it thin. I'll be starting off with sort of hog hair and stiff synthetics, as they're more rigid and it's much easier to disperse the paint. And I'll be, if we get time, I'll be using softer hair brushes. I've got a mixture of some sables, some soft synthetics from Rosemary & Co., a really good brush manufacturer. I've got a palette here where I have just adhered some glass to a sort of grey back. That just helps to sort of understand midtones a little bit more, and just how to sort of control tonal values back out to the lightest values and the darkest values. I'm using a full palette today. Most often I use a full palette. However, I do use limited palette at other times as well. So I've got here a lemon yellow. It's a lemon cadmium, actually, just for opacity. Then I've got a sort of a mid cadmium. I've got a yellow ochre here, a cadmium orange, burnt sienna, cadmium red, burnt umber, alizarin crimson, and then primary red there. I've just got a very bright green here, a sap green, a phthalo green, a phthalo blue, cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, and dioxazine violet. So they're the colours that I kind of usually use when I paint. Sometimes, as I said, I subtract quite a few out of there. Other times I may even add a few colours as well. So it just varies according to the piece that I'm working on. Whether it be portraiture, when it's portraits, I usually, well, these days actually, tend to use a bit of lead white and also titanium white as well. Titanium white is mainly there for the opacity and to keep that high. And when I want to sort of obtain a bit more transparency, I actually use a lead white for that purpose. So it is toxic, so you have to be very careful when you're handling it. But as long as you wash your hands and keep yourself clean, you should be relatively safe. Now, in regards to my start, I often change my method from painting to painting. If it's just a quick study like the one that we'll be doing here, then often instead of using one tone to actually create a monotone underpainting, which I often use a red brown of some kind, whether it be an ochre color or a sienna, or other ones. For the purpose of this exercise and for quicker things, I actually go with the actual colors of the objects themselves. So here I've just chosen a little citrus medley from down at the grocery. So just to get some different colors to sort of look at, and I will be using close to those colors in the underpainting and just shaping it and working it until I've created a drawing with those actual colours there. From there, I'll be overpainting. So yeah, now we can get started. So here we are, we're all set up. I've got my fruit in front and the lights all ready, and I've got my linen, as I said before, it's been primed just with an acrylic ground. Reason I do that is just a bit faster than actually putting an oil painting ground down. So yeah, so I've got my palette set up as well. So basically what I'm going to do is just show you more or less a drawing, but in colour, which I would then be able to work on after that. If I worked with just a coloured ground, like whether it's an ochre or an umber or something like that, if I worked in that method, I'd have to wait for that to dry before going over with colour. So this is just one method of many that I use to sort of start a piece. And because this is just a very quick study, I'm just going to show you with the drawing. I'm just going to grab a little bit of medium. As you probably saw earlier, I've got a lime, I've got a lemon, I've got an orange. So I'm going to grab just some colour for the lime, and just, oops, sorry. And just going to dilute it with some of the medium. This medium is quite a sticky one. I wouldn't normally use this one for an underpainting. I'd use one that would be a lot thinner. And so the ground is also fairly subdued, so that already is putting in a little bit of subtlety when it comes to the surface. So what I'm doing here is I'm mixing this fairly bright as far as the lime's concerned. I might tone it back with just a little bit of a red, so it's not too bright. That just takes the saturation down a little bit when I'm doing that. And that's round about right for potentially drawing in where the lime is. I'll now reach for just some orange. Now, bearing in mind again that the ground is quite subtle. So when I put some mark making with this, it's going to tone it down because of that background. If I was painting this on a white surface, I would actually be toning that back quite a bit because the saturation level would be too high. And then my lemon as well, I'll be starting off pretty basic. So yeah, that once again, that background colour that's being put down is going to subdue that. So these are way brighter than what I would normally do on a white surface, but they're just sort of underpainting colours for now. I will check them and see how they go from a calibration perspective when I actually start mark making. So now the idea is to keep these as thin and as kind of scrubby as possible. So it's this is often called a rub-in, this to start with. So I'm just kind of making shapes for now and just kind of getting a feel for the sizes that I want to paint in. So I'm just starting with the lime. I'm now just looking at the orange and just sort of drawing this in shape-wise, and then just filling in the form. And this is why it's called a rub-in, because I'm just sort of really scumbling the positioning into play at this point. And I'm not really concerned about any light and shade at this point. I really just want to get the size relationships down and the positioning down. And because it's already in the colors that I'll be using, it helps a lot, the fact that I've already got those colors down, if I'm going to be overpainting straight away, rather than if I had put an ochre or an umber or some kind of other color down to draw the shapes. Those colors would be integrating too much when you're doing alla prima sort of work. So that's why that yellow is probably a bit bright, so I'm going to tone that down. Just grab a little bit of a few of those other colours just so it's not too bright on the surface. And now I'm just going to draw basically where that lemon is going to fit, and then just making sure that paint stays nice and thin at this stage. So I'm just sort of feeling my way with it. If I was doing an actual real drawing, I would be doing a lot of measuring and sort of working out sort of angles a lot more. This method means that I can sort of fiddle with the shape, get it down, and sort of look at how they go in relationship to each other, which is, really quite important. So at this stage, I can start to look at angles. So I'm just carefully looking at, just basic angles at this point, but drawing with colour so that I can continue this sort of down the track. So I'm just double checking all those shapes and how they relate together. Need to bring the line down a bit. Going back for the orange. I'm just taking that, cutting into the lime and just moving that. So really no tone at this point, no values at this point, just positional, just making sure that the actual sizes themselves and how they relate to each other is all working. So, even just keeping the angles quite square at this point, like one angle to another. And I'll move this around with some cotton wool buds shortly as well, just so I can adjust the actual positioning. At this point too, I've got a background in black, which is actually behind the citrus there. So I'm just mixing, a little bit of burnt umber with a little bit of ultramarine blue, which I'm just helping to if I get the positioning of that in, it also helps to see the positive and negative space. So whenever you're sort of drawing, and if I was doing this in charcoal or pencil, I would be evaluating the positive and negative space of everything. So me putting this in is basically just doing in colour what I would normally do with either charcoal or pencil. But because this is alla prima, I really want to get all this in colour, so that when I start over painting, I've already got colours there working. So I might just grab a bigger brush. So this combination of burnt umber and ultramarine blue, just those two colours help to neutralise each other somewhat, so that I can get quite a dark sort of background colour. And this helps to tonally set the piece as well, because I do have, as I stated earlier, black cloth actually behind the fruit there. So I'm just kind of getting coverage. Once again, this is kind of more at a block out phase and a drawing phase at this point. And this just helps to start the process of looking at it sort of tonally. So we just had a short break there because I noticed some of the medium that I'm using, which is actually sun-dried linseed oil, is having a little bit of a crawling experience there, where it's just collapsing and rolling back in on itself. So I've just changed mediums to an actual underpainting medium from Langridge, which actually is thinner in how it works, because the sun-dried one is quite thick, but with this one it will actually take to the surface just a bit more, as you see there, with less sort of crawling of the paint and a bit more adhesion to the surface. So, as I stated earlier, this is just the underpainting. I'd be painting a lot more solid paint on this later, and this just helps to establish the tone. So this is now gripping a lot better to the surface. Normally the sun-dried is better sort of later in the process, but I'd started with that early because I had hoped to get a little bit more done on this, but just the sun-dried is having trouble gripping to the acrylic at this point, because normally I wouldn't go in an order like this, but just for the purpose of what we're doing here, it just helps to establish what's here. So that's actually a piece of cloth, so it's not even. It's actually got a few waves and curves in it. Okay, that helps to bring things down. Now I'm just checking the drawing again now that I've just put that in tonally. So now I'm just cutting in on the orange a bit. Just getting the subtlety of the exterior shape. So now I'm just going to go back to the other two, just to double check those. Might just grab some cotton wool buds at this time. So I'm going to take that line down a bit, just reposition that. So often when you've got objects there, you can actually see where things need to be adjusted. So the cotton wool buds I find are really excellent for this, like just for playing around with calibrating the form when you're working just with brush and colour. It's, you know, as I said earlier, it's just like drawing, but just in colour really. So I'm just feeling my way with those edges. I'm just swapping around with the colours. I'm just looking at positive and negative space, like the gaps and the channels between the different objects are important. Let's go back to the lemon, just make sure, double checking everything. And then just shaping everything. Everything's fairly well positioned now as far as where they should be. I'm just going to trim in a little bit on some of the shapes now, just to sort of calibrating. I find this is quite a good way to draw. When it comes to quick sort of studies. Now I can actually swap back to some of that mix I had earlier, but I'm going to use quite a bit more ultramarine in it now, just to keep the shadows cool, and bearing in mind they're going to interact with the actual base that's there already. So I'm just working in where these shadows are going to fall. Just being careful to make sure the positioning is working. That one's working pretty good. There's a very minimal gap between this shadow. just, once again, I'm just rubbing in the paint to get the positioning. Now, often in the darker values, you know, it's very much a tradition of the old masters and so on, where often their darker values were quite sort of thin, and then the highlight colours were quite thick. So I'm kind of working a little bit with that too, you know, just softening off the edges a little bit with the cotton wool bud. And then just working on the shadow on the lemon as well, which so it's kind of like painting, drawing. If I was going to be doing this a whole lot more realistically, I would actually do a pencil sketch first or a charcoal sketch, then transfer it. But as I stated earlier, because this is just a sketch, so that almost is where we need to sort of have it before I start working in some thin sort of tone. Get a little bit darker underneath the objects, because I may leave later on, if I choose to finish this, I may leave some of these darker values up and under, because they're interacting fairly nicely with the ground that's actually there, and bearing in mind that this is on the objects are on a piece of plywood, so you do get these horizontal streaks that are kind of running through. Now, there's a fair bit of settle in this medium before it tacks up, so they will diffuse a little bit. So now I can start playing a little bit with tone on the actual objects themselves. So still underpainting at this stage. So I can start reaching for and playing with some of the colour on the palette, looking at the shadow on the lemon, which we've actually got a range of colours going on that lemon. Down here, there's a lot of oranges that are actually bouncing up off the wood into lemon, and then back here it's reflecting a lot of sort of green shades. So over here I can just start to fiddle with the tone that's there from an underpainting perspective. Once again, keeping it very thin, and then just playing with some of those more green shades on the lemon there. And also there's some shadow back here and through there. A few streaks But then down on the lower side, that's where I said it's getting a lot warmer and less cool, sort of down here. There's also a bit of warmth back up the top. So it's sort of, this would be the very beginning stage of actually applying tone just from the perspective of an underpainting. So once you've established an underpainting, it's much easier to sort of go over with very accurate sort of forms later on. So I'm just going to put a bit of shadow on the orange. There's a whole dark passage back here. So these are all very transparent and thin and light at this point. There's a shadow cast from that lemon. I'm just going to shape it a little bit. So I'm just beginning to just look at the basics of where these tones are going to fall. Looking at the shadow that is just behind the lime. Just in preparation for when I would actually put some final sort of colours down. So this kind of, helps to serve the purpose of creating both a drawing and a tonal map of what I'd be kind of looking at when I do the thicker, more intense observation on top. It's just a basic plan. And a little bit of tone. I will maybe even get a cloth in a minute and just sort of take back some of the body of the colour, and also position, basically where some of the highlight values would be. So this exposes the surface again. So it just means that, when I do thicker colour, it doesn't interact too much with what's below. Yes, we might leave it here for just a little bit and come back to this after a short break. So we just had a momentary stretch of the legs there, just before I'm going to shape up a few more little things, just for the purpose of keeping this fairly quick as an exercise. I might be starting to put on a little bit more solid colour, which I'll do now. So we might grab some white just so I can quickly map out the actual wood colour that they sit on. It'll help to form what's around as well. So bearing in mind I've got kind of a greeny sort of base. I wouldn't normally work on this base for this one, but this is what I had sort of lying around. I would have actually toned the canvas a lot more towards the wood. So I can check that and just see, okay, that's working fairly well. So I'll just, for the purpose of this exercise, just get this down fairly quickly. So at this stage as well, it's very much a rub in. So colours kept fairly thin and kind of scrubbed in, which then I can, when I overpaint, they'll work out a lot better when the thinner your colour is underneath, the less they interact with an overpainting. So if you start off very thick with paint, you're sort of constrained to get everything pretty right almost from the beginning. So at this stage, I'm not really concerned about detail, little fine touches or anything like that. It's really still very much about drawing at this stage. Making sure that all the shapes are correct. I'm just putting the wood in because it kind of helps to see the actual fruit a little bit more. So if I go for something similar to what the wood colour would be in a final sense, it makes it very much easier to kind of judge where the colours of your fruit are. Going to get a bit more reds in there, just coming through, because that's what the plywood colour has got, some pinks and reds coming through. So it becomes a lot easier to see where I was with the colour of the fruit when I've got the background colour and the wood sort of tones that are sort of down there. Once again, I might even use my cotton wool bud to just remove some of that paint as well, just so a lot more of the underpainting kind of shows through. So now I can sort of drag some of this through just to expose almost some of the wood grain back. Not that I'm really after doing much detail at this point. I've got a choice. I can either really push this, you know, through to a really high-end finished detailed piece of work, which obviously takes a lot more time, or I can choose to leave this, if I kept pushing it, as something which would be a lot looser and almost more like an impression, you know, which is what you would do if it's a study. So that just helps to remove that. Even using a brush without paint is sometimes a really good idea, because you can sort of tend to blend a little bit more. I'm just reaching for a rag. It's always good to have a rag handy, because you can then get back to a brush which has got very little on it. And there's the old Rembrandt trick, which he used to scribe through when he did hair and various things as well. So it just helps to give an impression of wood, which is all I'm kind of really after at this stage. If I can actually chop into my fruit without worrying too much, because I can just use those cotton wool buds or just paint another layer on top. So I just go back and just bite over the top. So I probably would leave the wood at this stage, because I don't want to put too much, you know, emphasis on the wood. Just get a hint of some of the grain. And I might just get a bit darker on the background again. So now I'm just painting some paint over the top, which is thicker, just so we can once again get a better feel for all the tonal values. Once you get sort of some of the lightest and darkest shades in, you can evaluate your area much quicker. So it is material, so there is a bit of a wave in it. So just the building up of that body helps to kind of see where everything is at a lot more, and it's a lot easier to assess tone. So I'm just going to work with the positioning of a few more detailed elements within the painting. So now I can sort of, now that I've quickly just mapped in what's actually taking place, I can now just start to plan out where some of the detailed elements would be in the painting, like the end areas, and also, you know, positioning of the stem, where the stem would be. So once those are established, it's much easier to sort of find the rest of the form of the fruit. If I can work those in, now I can start to be more specific about some of the, where some of the detail would come later on. Like there's some parts on the orange which have more shape. So here we're back to our drawing again, but I'm drawing in colour. So if this was going to have an overpainting, this just helps to sort of work in all the form, because it's reasonably common of me to push this to a very detailed kind of level. So if that's the case, you know, this is what I'm doing now. I'm just kind of working in some of the drawing elements. And a little bit of tone at this point, but not a lot. So this will blend out later. So lemon needs to sort of get more towards the brighter end of the, so this is very bright now, but I'll be sort of pushing that around. So take these glasses off. So here's where, you know, I've got a choice. I can either keep this really very impressionistic, or I can build this up. You know, if I was going to do a proper finished piece, I've then got the luxury of later on putting glazes down, calibrating colour that way. But as it stands, I'm just going to be doing more of an impressionist kind of piece. So some of the soft hair brushes are good at this point because the touch is a lot lighter. So the marks that a soft hair brush makes are very different to the marks that a stiff bristle brush they tend to remove as well as actually lay down, whereas the softer ones they mainly just keep the paint there and just help to kind of just move it around. Might have a short break now. So yeah, just had a quick break again, and I'll just be working these other two fruits up to a similar level to the lemon, so that it's ready then to either wait overnight and then really push that later, or we can do just a little bit of extra detail over the top. So I'm just going for, once again, I'm going for something very bright over the top and fairly raw, because I've actually got paint which has been mixed, and at that point I can sort of blend into it with other colours. Sometimes I have different methods of working. If I've got the time, I'll sometimes mix colour strings. So I'll actually mix a whole stack of different tones and colours which will be used. It means I can just reach for them. This is kind of more of an immediate sort of painting technique. It's a little bit more less planned and a little bit more, in some ways, a little bit more haphazard. It's sort of how I work when I work impressionistically. I don't really have a plan to it. I just lay the colours out and feel a bit here from there. But when I'm actually doing something more planned and something that I really want to resolve fully, that's when I actually do mix the colour strings. So starting off with the darker tones all the way to lighter ones from a number of different colour families, and then actually mixing those together tonally to actually create an image. But for this, for the more impressionistic work, I often will put down something fairly bright and then actually go through a process of actually blending it with sort of the colours that are kind of around. So once again, the saturation of this is very high, but once I actually get it into the other values that are around, it then takes on more of a calibrated look at that point. So really doing a lot of wet and wet, just moving the paint around a lot at this point as I kind of work out where the shapes and the forms of the drawing are. So once again, as stated earlier, if I was doing a fully tight, realistic version of this, I would have done a pencil sketch first. Then all my positioning is all established, and then I'm not drawing. I'm just painting then. So, as I said, still very much an underpainting still at this stage. Even drag a little bit of that orange into here. Just going to play with that lime now. It's very dark part that comes into the lime. A little bit of medium. sometimes it's much easier to paint and not talk. So I always have no trouble listening while I paint, but often when I'm talking and painting, I can't actually concentrate too well. So we might even just have another quick break at this junction. Just put another little swing here. Sometimes these fan brushes can be handy just to kind of just unify and clarify a few things before detail goes on the top. So I might have a break here again. Okay, after another short break, just going to do a little bit of feathering in a few places. I might be just like as now, just softening back some of the shadows, particularly on the transition where they work from the edge of the shadow to where the wood is. It's actually reasonably soft back in this area. So I'm just dragging some of that actual background color back into and over the top of the shadow, and just manipulating that a little bit. So once again, if this was not just a study, I would be using smaller brushes and being very specific about where I was actually putting different things. I do tend, when I work detailed, I do tend to work with smaller brushes, but when I'm doing things like this, I do tend to work with larger brushes and just let the detail state what it wants to state with the broader brushes. It's more almost a positional of where some of the light and shade is hitting at this point before I go back and start to be a bit more detailed now. I'm just going to soften. There's actually a shadow up under the cloth here. So I'm just going to So I'm just being a little bit more specific about the shadow colour. Just hopping around a little bit at the moment. I'm not sort of really focusing on the detail just yet at all. If I got to the detailed stage, that's when I start to really get very nuanced about where I'm sort of putting in light and shade. I'd be a lot more focused in on specific zones rather than at the moment where I'm just kind of jumping around everywhere at this point, just kind of seeing just a basic impression of what's actually taking place. play a little bit more with the orange before we stop, because normally at this point I would want to get very much in front of the image and block off the camera and get really quite detailed if I was going to go into a detailed version of what's here. Sometimes these bigger brushes just help it stay looser. Ever since I've had to wear glasses, it's been a lot more of a pain because my vision is not what it was. When I was younger, it was much easier to kind of do things. I wish I could almost get laser surgery. It'd sort of make things a lot easier. So I would almost kind of leave it at that if I was going to do something really detailed. If I was going to leave it as an impressionistic piece, I'd probably push it further. In fact, I'd push it a lot further, but I'd be letting that dry out just a little bit. I'd be coming it back in later in the day. But if this was going to be a fully detailed piece, I would pretty much leave it at this, ready for something, you know, which I could come back the next day and really just make it very detailed and specific. Just going to lighten those shadows a tiny bit. So I can pretty much use a finger. So yeah, I would be leaving it at this point. I just put on the highlights and be a little bit more accurate about where I would place those for later. So they're just more or less just positionals at this point about where I would put the light and shade. Just rinsing so you can get a cleaner brush. So the next layer, once this dries, would be the proper full description of all forms. Yes, we might just wrap it up here for now.